I meditated for over 400 hours and read over 20 books this year, and it completely changed my life. I want to explain to you the journey I went through this year and how, when you get to the point on the spiritual path when you really want to deeply commune with the divine and live in service of that power, how completely that can revolutionize and transform your life. It really feels like I've lived a lifetime just within this 1 year. I'm a completely different person, and my level of consciousness is completely different than it was just 1 year ago today. 1 year ago, I was regularly smoking weed. I was addicted to video games. I was regularly discharging my vital energy. And I was not eating healthy. And I had a lot of tension and pain in the body. I was also at a low point in life. Several of the careers, of the things I've tried to do in life, of the goals I had, it all was just falling apart. So I was also partially depressed at the time. Now, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been, I would say, on and off the spiritual path, but mostly on the spiritual path, interested in spiritual material, kind of ramping up over time, and truthfully ramping up to a higher degree this year in particular. But about 5 years ago is when I started to meditate, and it would just be 20 minutes each morning at that time, and I was pretty consistent over the last 4 to 5 years. And over that time, I saw a lot of benefits of increased peace of mind and just feeling better in my own skin. But I wasn't truthfully fully committed. I wasn't carrying that presence throughout the day. I was still operating primarily out of ego consciousness, out of selfish desires. And I also want to say that my intention for this YouTube channel is not my primary intention is not to make money, is not to have some type of clout. My only real intention is to help you and my audience to wake up and help you grow and develop across all aspects of your life in any way I can. And I hope by sharing my journey, I'm able to facilitate that. So at the beginning of this year, actually at the end of last year, I found out about a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. And I began to read that in December. And the way I found out about this was there was a teacher, Michael Singer, who I'd listened to for a couple years, and he was one of the teachers that really made me devote myself more to the spiritual path. I actually read all three of his books, The Untethered Soul, The Surrender Experiment, and Living Untethered, and I'd highly recommend all of those. It's a good introduction to the spiritual path, and he is a disciple of Yogananda, so he mentioned that he had read Autobiography in one of his books and on his podcast. So I got the book and started reading it, and I think I just, early on, I was really just captivated by the book and by the way this master Yogananda lived his life and how divinely everything unfolded for him, because he was just living only in service of God. There was no ego consciousness left within him. And, it's a very unique situation. He's a master, So we're not all going to be at that level without putting in the work and making the effort to get there. But just seeing what's possible and how one's life can unfold when you've reached that level of consciousness is very inspiring. And his life, and here's the book, Autobiography of a Yogi. But his life was just full of miracles, and he visited many different saints, and then he ended up traveling from India to America to found the Self-Realization Fellowship, which is an organization devoted to uplifting the consciousness of its members. So I read that book, and then sometime, maybe a week or two later, at this point, this must have been early February or mid-February, I got the intuition to order the Self-Realization Fellowship lessons. And these lessons are essentially teaching you the path of deep meditation and the path Yogananda himself taught. He wrote these lessons himself, and the purpose is to just learn deeply about what the spiritual path really entails, how to live a spiritual life, and how to commune with God on a daily basis. So over the course of this year, I've read 23 of those lessons, and it's completely changed my life and the way I see things. Because everything just looks different when you really come to understand that everything you see around you is a manifestation of the divine. Everything looks different, and it profoundly changes the way you live your life. There's a difference between being able to recite that and kind of understanding it intellectually and having that knowledge. But it's very different when you assimilate that information into your being and you really have that wisdom. It's a different level of understanding. And that's been the difference this year, is all these spiritual truths. I've read several books, I've listened to the spiritual teachers, and you think you understand what they're talking about until you really go deep in meditation and experience these truths for yourself. That's when your life completely starts to transform and your consciousness starts to transform. Now, in the beginning stages, when I was reading these lessons and reading the autobiography, I'd read that these masters, Yogananda and his line of gurus, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Mahashai, Babaji, his line of gurus are omnipresent because they're masters of consciousness. And I understood intellectually what that meant, because everything you see around you is made of God, is made through God's vibration of Om, or the Holy Ghost. This is the vibration that sustains all of creation. And therefore, your individual consciousness is just a wave in the sea of consciousness. So you're never separate from the entirety of God and the entirety of the infinite. You're one with that. And when you develop to the highest enlightened level of the consciousness of a master, you are aware of everything that's going on. You're everywhere. You're omnipresent. So it's one thing to read about that, but in, I believe, June of this year, I ended up going to a conference known as the Self-Realization Fellowship Convocation, in which all of the devotees of Yogananda and this path from around the world come and meet there, and the monks and nuns give talks, and there's 3-hour and 1-hour meditations every day. And just that collective energy that was built up when I went there, and over the course of that week, the energy building up, I was able to strongly feel and establish that connection with Yogananda's presence and his line of gurus. And ever since then, I've felt that presence guiding my life, and I've been able to commune with him and the masters and God in meditation ever more strongly as time goes on. And it's just so profound that the Yogananda is no longer in the body, but his presence can be felt if you tune into it. And the same is true of other masters throughout time, such as Jesus Christ, such as Krishna, and several others. So that was where I really established that connection with my guru, Yogananda. And then shortly after that, and I also had several mystical experiences and just feeling strongly the presence of God. In fact, every day at that convocation, I was brought to tears from the profound feelings of bliss and joy and God's presence I was feeling through the talks and the meditations. And I met a few good friends there, and to which they live in a sort of world brotherhood colony. And I came out there and lived with them for a weekend, and that was very profound, seeing the way in which they live a very simple life, devoted life, meditating for about 6 hours per day. And both of those experiences, and then later in the year, I went back to that same colony for a retreat in which several of the other devotees came as well. And I was there for 10 days at that time. And both the convocation and especially that 10-day experience shows what you can happen when you immerse yourself in divine consciousness. And that's really all you're focused on. That's all you're thinking about. That's all that matters for that week, for that 10 days. You're just, excuse me, I'm trying to find the words to express what I felt there. It's just, after immersing yourself in those divine vibrations for that period of time, you're living in that. You're just filled with bliss and joy and peace, and you don't need anything else. You have God's love, and that's all we need. That's all we really crave when we're out in the world looking for satisfaction through our desires. What we really want is the love of God, and that can only be found inside of yourself. So just recognizing that truth and realizing it completely changed the way that I operate in life. And I'm now to the point where I meditate every day for 1 hour, morning and evening. And several times throughout this year, I've meditated for longer, for 3-hour periods at the convocation, for 3-hour periods and longer at the colony I did the retreat at. And, just several times on my own, going for longer than an hour. At first when you begin to meditate, the mind may be very restless, but that's how the mind is throughout your entire life, is what needs to be realized. So through sustained practice of meditation, you can start to calm the mind and come into a state of peace by tuning into the spiritual eye. And over time, as you become more proficient and as you're able to sit for longer in meditation, completely quiet the mind and see what's left after you clear the mind of all the desires and the restlessness and everything that's going on, everything you think you need to be happy. What's underneath all that and what's actually the true essence of reality is God's love is omnipresent and is what sustains all of creation. It's one thing to say that, it's another thing to experience it through deep meditation. But beyond just that, at a certain point, I came to realize that I was still, even though I was tapping into these spiritual planes and tapping into this joy, there were still, it doesn't mean that it was without challenges, without difficulties. You know, a little bit after that retreat, what ended up happening is my business partner and I had a falling out. And that kind of sent me into a dark night of the soul. See my video I made on the dark night of the soul. But that was a challenging period where I was even, doubting what I was doing, and a lot of old patterns were coming up, and a lot of self-hate and certain repressed emotions, have been coming up. So it's not that meditation just magically makes all the challenges you're dealing in life going away, but it will put you into a much more peaceful and calm, and it's not always going to be calm. There was a lot of turmoil during that period, but and that's also a way God tests you to see if you're still going to maintain your practice, to see if you're still going to stay devoted during those times. But the meditation will certainly put you in a better position, and just spiritual living and just growing and developing yourself in general is going to put you in a better position to deal with the challenges. Um, so yeah, so I realized that the spiritual living isn't going to make all the psychological problems go away. So I actually started to read and research and study a lot of psychological material and books, specifically pertaining to shadow work, trauma, relationships, many different aspects, healing the body and the mechanics of the body. And I think it's very important that we educate ourselves across a wide variety of aspects to we want to be physically, mentally, and spiritually fit and well and psychologically sound. And it's necessary to look at those parts of yourself and introspect and look at and I've done a lot of introspection this year and a lot of deep diving into the psyche. And that's where I've been able to heal a lot of these old patterns, because it's just those places we don't want to look, those things we don't want to confront. That's the most important for us to introspect and really go into that. And a lot of these books on shadow work have helped me do so. And also, obviously, the self-realization fellowship lessons and introspecting and just learning these spiritual principles. And there was several times along this, I've been reading a lot of books where I kind of doubted, I kind of felt that this path of self-realization is all I need. I don't need to read these books. And I do believe on a certain level that's true, that just this path could take me all the way. But I also really enjoy, learning about all this material from very profound books. And I came to the insight recently that a big reason that I feel called to read all of these books and learn all this information and really educate myself across a wide variety of aspects is so that I can help others. It's not just about me, it's about God and my guru, Yogananda, want me to do this so that I'm able to help others. And I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. This YouTube channel is the start of that, and stay tuned. I'm going to have some sort of services coming out, and I'm going to start a newsletter, and some exciting things will be coming this next year. But that's a primary reason why I need to educate myself across all these subjects, is to help you and help my audience and whoever, and just help through my interactions in daily life with people to be the embodiment of spiritual living and have the knowledge and the depth of self-healing and understanding across these different modalities to help people where they're at and to explain things in a way that people will understand. So that's really my mission here. And last month is when I formally entered into the guru-disciple relationship with Yogananda. There's Yogananda right there, and that picture is known as the last mile. It was taken about 1 hour before he left the body. But back to what I was saying, I entered formally into the guru-disciple relationship with Yogananda last month in November at a Kriya Yoga initiation ceremony. And Kriya Yoga is the highest technique that Yogananda and that line of masters taught to liberate oneself from ego consciousness and become fully enlightened in a short period of time, in a relatively short period of time compared to other methods. So that's been a massive blessing, and the joy and peace felt through that meditation technique is unparalleled to anything you could experience in this world. Now, if you feel called to research Kriya Yoga, be careful, because there's various different Kriya Yogas out there. And you're only eligible for Kriya Yoga initiation after you complete lessons 1 to 18 of the Self-Realization Fellowship. So I'm not able to discuss how to practice that technique. But, but there are, in autobiography, it's talked about what the technique entails, and just be careful if you look it up online, because I don't want you to get caught in a sort of Kriya Yoga that's not a true spiritual science, and that's going to sidetrack you from your spiritual development. So I just wanted to mention that. But now that I've sort of let you in on my spiritual path and my journey throughout this last year, now I want to go into some of the books I've read and what I've gotten out of that. Like I said, it's just allowed me these shadow workbooks, Meeting the Shadow, Romancing the Shadow, Owning Your Own Shadow. That's a few of them. They've allowed me to introspect and see all those other parts of my psyche. There's that spiritual part, and that's who I truly am. There's my connection with God and my guru, and that's the truest part of myself. But that doesn't mean the ego just goes away. There's still parts that I'd rather not look at. There's still undesirable habits and patterns. And really, Yogananda's guru, Sri Yukteswar, said, when you look fear in the face, it ceases to trouble you. And that's sort of the philosophy here, is when you really look at these things and work with them and just hear what the voices are trying to say. And it's not always going to be pretty, but it'll allow you to really get past that and heal and come to be integrated and holistic in the way you live your life. So I now want to go into 3 or 4 of my favorite books that I've read this year. And this was my favorite one, Autobiography of a Yogi, that just completely changed my life. And, I almost feel as if this may not be the first lifetime that I've followed this line of masters. It just clicked into place so quickly. And by the way, I'm not saying that you have to follow this line or follow the path that I have. Regardless of what path you're on, I'm assuming, especially if you've made it this far into the video, that you're very interested in spirituality and topics akin to that nature. So this is just a very inspiring book to know what's possible when you attain that highest level of consciousness, and just to give a lot of divine inspiration. So I'd highly recommend this. And actually, this is going to be the first book I read in 2026 as well. And I'm very excited to, now that I've gained that increased level of perception, to revisit this book and read it with a higher level of awareness is going to be a treat. Now, another one of my favorite books that made a big impact on me this year is Cupid's Poisoned Arrow. And this book has to do a lot with relationships and retaining your sexual energy and things of that nature. This was important for me because honestly, lust was a big thing I was dealing with, was wanting to be free of that. It was a bit, that was one big challenge I was dealing with in the psyche that was a struggle for a while. And reading this book and really coming to assimilate these truths into my life helped me tremendously with that. As well as also just praying to God and praying to be free of that. You know, it's only through God ultimately that we can be helped. And it's important to remember your body, everything around you, God created this, and it's only He that can truly heal us. But He can, give us inspiration to seek out certain resources that can help, such as this book. And it really just explains how in intimate relationships, the more one, and this applies to both men and women, the more you go to orgasm, the more you will get habituated to your partner and oftentimes seek out a novel partner. And this is how our biology programs us to reproduce. But there's another bonding mechanism that we can tap into. And there's a system of lovemaking referred to in this book known as carezza, which is just a more slow, gentle form of making love without orgasm. And I've tried this a couple times with my partner, and I can attest that it's just much more fulfilling, much more connecting, superior in every way to the way we've been taught to make love, which is in a compulsive manner. So if you want to get, that sort of relationship aspect of your life squared away, I'd highly recommend this, Cupid's Poisoned Arrow by Marnia Robinson. Another one of my favorite books here, and this one I'm actually about 75% of the way through. I'm not done with it yet, but Aligned, Relaxed, Resilient. Something I've come to understand, especially towards the end of this year, is the body and healing the body, healing the tension in the body is a foundation for spiritual living and just the way you operate in life. It's a foundation for everything. And it's very important. And that's been another thing I've struggled with this year, is especially sitting in meditation when I want to go for multiple hours at a time, tensions arising in the body, taking me out of that deep state of peace because there's tension in the body. And it's still something I'm dealing with. But this book has been a great help. And there's basically, this book is a big proponent of mindfulness and explains that when you're mindful and living in the present, you allow your body to move spontaneously and freely. And oftentimes, we're locked up in the neck and the head, and when you're thinking thoughts, your body's going to be locked up and not moving spontaneously and freely when you're thinking involuntary thoughts. So he gives several practical exercises and tips in this book for practicing mindfulness throughout your life and aligning the body with the field of gravity, becoming relaxed in the body and the way the body moves, and then finally becoming resilient in just the way that you move in the world, and that the body is grounded and moving spontaneously, and the subtle energies, you can feel them moving through the body, and the body feels alive, not dead, as a lot of us, sometimes feel aches and pains. And so this is very important. Aligned, Relaxed, Resilient by Will Johnson. And then one last book here. I just finished reading this yesterday, Conversations with Yogananda. If you want more after you read Autobiography of a Yogi, I'd recommend this book, because Autobiography of a Yogi was written with such humility that you may not understand the full scope of how profound Yogananda's consciousness and way of living was. And this just gives you an example of how gracefully he was able to answer the questions of all his disciples, and it's very diverse, very many different situations, very diverse conversations with many different people, and it's just interesting to see how a master operates in this world. So with that being said, I wish you the best going into this next year, and I hope in some way this video was able to inspire you to make the most of this next year, and I'm going to do my best to continue releasing these videos and help in any way I can. So I wish you the best. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Jai Guru.